Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into Miss Marple and the Teacup That Caught a Lie, a fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Miss Marple. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. A Teacup's Whisper. The scream sliced through the heavy air of the Ashcombe estate like a sharp blade through silk, fabric ripping and fraying in a heartbeat. It came not from a place of terror, but from the drawing room adorned with crystal chandeliers and exquisite tapestries, where a lady, a robust woman with a glossy ebony bob, had been clutching her chest, eyes wide and wild, her teacup shattering against the polished oak floor, the china fragments glimmering ominously in the candlelight. Outside, the winds howled with a foreboding intensity, rattling the heavy, leaded glass windows. But within the confines of that esteemed gathering, the uproar of polite society crumbled into stunned silence, a tableau of shock and intrigue. Miss Marple remained quiet, poised in the corner chair, somewhat overshadowed by the opulence of the room, the faint trace of lavender clinging to her tailored dress, a stark contrast against the surrounding extravagance. Tea ceremonies at Lord Ashcombe's estate were typically delights of gossip and dainty pastries. Yet, upon witnessing the chaos unfurl, she felt the unmistakable shiver of something amiss. Lord Ashcombe himself, pale and flustered, leaned slightly over the fallen teacup, fumbling his words as they clung to him like cobwebs. "My dear Mrs. Burnett, are you quite well? I saw it. It was there, right behind the window." Mrs. Burnett's voice trembled, a wire stretched too taut. "A shadow. Lurking," the assembled guests murmured, exchanging glances that shifted like gears in a machine suddenly thrown out of alignment. Miss Marple sat back, her gaze sharp and methodical, taking in the scene with the scrutiny of a hawk. The disparities within the gathering formed a web in her mind, a web that required unraveling. Had she seen Mr. Henstridge's eyes glaze over in an unsettling manner, as if he were the one shrouded in that ghostly hue, lingering just outside? Or was it just the flickering candlelight creating illusions amidst the approaching storm outside? Now, Mrs. Burnett, shadows can often play tricks," said Miss Foxley, a schoolmistress whose stern demeanor belied an eagerness to dispel the supernatural, although her voice quavered under the weight of their gathering tension. "Perhaps a mere figment of your imagination." "Or not," Mrs. Burnett retorted, collecting herself passionately, her pulse racing again like a lark caught in a storm. "Do you not feel it? This house is filled with something ominous." Miss Marple's keen ears, seasoned by years of listening to the discreetly spoken secrets of St. Mary Mead's residents, began to pick up deeper rhythms among the voices. An unclaimed teacup caught her eye, strangely adorned with a small blue butterfly motif that looked out of place against the pomp of the Ashcombe's china. For a fleeting moment, she pictured old Mrs. Grimsby, that peculiar woman from the village whose affinity toward delicate butterflies had been a source of both admiration and gossip. "If I may inquire, why do you think it was a shadow, Mrs. Burnett?" Miss Marple's gentle voice cut through the murmur like a soft breeze discovering a restful cove. Everyone turned toward her with curious eyes. "Why, I—" The woman hesitated, embarrassment shifting her posture slightly. "I could not say. It was simply a felt sensation, akin to when one is observed under the very penumbra of trouble. Shadows do have a way of obscuring truths, don't they?" Miss Marple replied, drawing her knitting closer and feigning an innocent smile that cloaked the sharpness behind her eyes. Here lay the crux. This soiree was not about tea and scones, but rather a gathering cloaked in hidden motives and unarticulated fears. Suddenly, something rustled behind the curtains, a soft stirring that ignited a collective tension. Mr. Henstridge, his hands raised in protest, dashed toward the window. "I'll not have this nonsense. We are well beyond such flights of fancy." "Oh, but flights of fancy sometimes reveal greater truths, do they not?" Miss Marple interjected, her tone light, but her eyes probing. The room's laughter faded into discomfort, all except for Mrs. Burnett, who visibly flinched at the mere mention of notions levitating around the air. I merely wish to help." Mr. Henstridge's posture sank slightly, revealing a crack in his facade. "I didn't mean to cause a stir. Just a joke. You know how wives can be." "Indeed," Miss Marple observed, eyes narrowing with her shrewd observance. "Are you often the source of Mr. Henstridge's laughter, Mrs. Burnett?" I might be," the lady stammered, yet Miss Marple sensed the tremor underneath the laughter, a hint of tension straining at the edges of camaraderie. As the guests exchanged strained smiles, Miss Marple realized that the atmosphere of cordiality was merely skin-deep, scarcely concealing the whirlpool of discord beneath. She tucked away her unyielding suspicions regarding Mr. Henstridge's defensiveness and the sudden change in Mrs. Burnett. They each wore masks of polite civilization, but underneath smoldered unspoken fears and desires that awaited revelation. The evening progressed, but the looming presence remained, and the very air seemed ripe with possibilities of treachery and secrecy. A sudden crack of thunder jolted everyone from their preoccupation, and amidst the chaos of voices, the large drawing-room door swung open, revealing a figure clad in black, a shadow emerging before the storm's very heart. "Good evening, everyone." The voice rang out like a bell tolling, chilled and precise. It was Lady Beatrice, a cousin recently returned from abroad, her demeanor silvered with an icy elegance that obliterated any remaining warmth in the room. "I've heard whispers of an incident. Has my arrival been so terribly awaited?" Miss Marple's heart quickened. Intrigue thickened in the air, half-formed answers teasing at the edges of her awareness. Lady Beatrice's gaze seemed to sift through the gathered guests like sifted flour, each face occupied with silent machinations. But before she could indulge a second thought, a chilling shriek erupted from the far side of the room, shattering the stillness. "Where's the butterfly cup? It's gone!" The air thickened with tension, and Miss Marple felt her pulse racing. "Gone?" The word escaped her lips unbidden, for she knew that in the world of appearances, tragedies often lurked just beyond perception. As guests turned, aghast and spectral, Miss Marple caught a faint whiff of betrayal, an undulating shadow among the tapestry of their lives, and everything around her, from the shattered teacup to the sidelong glances, crystallized into a desperate resolve. Here, in this house filled with secrets, she would unspool the hidden threads of the night's fabric before it suffocated them all, propelled by the echoing realization that fear was merely a whisper away from unveiling something profound and dark. It was time to uncover the truth, and her instincts flared. Miss Marple leaned forward. What she had perceived in the teacup's shattered remnants was merely the beginning. Shadows danced around her as the storm intensified outside, and with it a more sinister revelation, hiding just beyond the horizon. Chapter 2. A Scent of Deceit. The world outside had descended into chaos, the storm swirling with a ferocity that matched the dread that was settling inexorably like an unwelcome shroud over the Ashcombe estate. A single, piercing scream echoed through the corridors, silencing even the clattering of dainty teacups and the flickering of dying candles, freezing the laughter that had just moments ago echoed within the drawing room. In the locked study, the figure of Lord Ashcombe lay crumpled, a lifeless form, draped over his mahogany desk, with a teacup, intact but shattered from impact, rolling languidly across the floor, a macabre harbinger of calamity. The gathered guests stumbled through the heavy wooden door, their faces contorted with shock. Miss Marple pushed her way to the fore, tranquility interrupting the tumult of their shrieks. She knelt beside Ashcombe, a faint whiff of cologne mixing with the sour tang of fear that permeated the room. "He's passed," Lord Ashcombe's butler whimsically whispered, the words tumbling from his lips like marbles rolling from a bag. "Not dead by natural causes, I suspect." The wail of the storm outside seemed to reflect the turmoil surrounding them. As they stood amongst the finest artifacts and silk draperies, Miss Marple's penetrating gaze scanned the interiors of the study, her mind running ahead, dissecting the plays of human emotion swirling palpably. "His state lends itself to grievous conclusions," she observed softly, pressing a finger gently against the rim of the grotesquely cracked teacup, noting the powdery residue within. "It feels awfully wrong. A scalding cup next to him and a bold stain on the cuff of his jacket." "Coarse tea, perhaps," ventured Miss Foxley, her mouth set with uncertainty as she skirted beside Miss Marple. "One brewed in haste, but that couldn't possibly be the reason for—" "Tea is only the start," Miss Marple mused, her voice insistent against the rising tide of gossip. "Mere tea can never precipitate such a conclusion. The cup, it's shattered, but the fragments remain here, by chance or purpose." She looked around the room, keenly observing the faces of the remaining guests, each one masked in layers of discomposure. "I think it would be most prudent if we called for the doctor," Mr. Henstridge blurted, his tone a sharp contrast against the delicate threads of anxiety. "What does it matter how he met his end? We must summon help at once." "It matters greatly," Miss Marple interjected, leaning back on her heels with an air of authority. "For it informs us that circumstances shall never hold still in the shadows, not when there are no doors ajar in this bitch of a storm." Mrs. Burnett, glancing furtively at the windows cloaked in rain, swallowed audibly. But how could this happen? Surely he was safe in his own home, locked against untoward intrusions. Ah, but was he? For those with something to lose find ways to cut corners. Betrayed trust is the knife that severs, as one might say, Miss Marple articulated, peering at Lord Ashcombe's crumpled note near the spill of ink that adorned his desk, a note hastily scrawled before the veil of death had fallen. Letters looped chaotically, riddled with urgency, though the words eluded her searching eyes. Miss Marple turned her thoughts, deducing that Lord Ashcombe's relationships cloaked illusions. "What of you, Lady Beatrice? You arrived so curiously right before this incident. Where were you just moments before?" "Why making my presence known, Miss Marple?" Lady Beatrice replied, flipping a wisp of hair behind her ear, a careful performance of indifference, thinly veiling a quelling anxiety. A distant cousin, yes. Yet does a family member not have the right to arrive at a friend's gathering? The guests exchange glances, the shadowy spectre of fear darkening the corners of their carefully curated facades. And speak of family, Miss Marple turned to Mr. Henstridge again. Where did you go so abruptly after our last conversation? A moment you dismissed as a jest, but your attentiveness to Lady Beatrice has shifted, has it not? I was merely fetching a cigar for the good man. Henstridge's voice cracked slightly, his finely groomed brow pinching with palpable tension. What would I have to gain? An acquaintance? Perhaps a little encouragement to not be the vanishing penny, my good man? For one finds shadows linger close during fleeting moments of darkness, do they not? Miss Marple grinned, a fleeting smile that spoke of something dark and festering just beneath the surface of their polite society. Meanwhile, as the wind howled beyond the windows, the butler cleared his throat pointedly. And what of the other guests, Miss Marple? What say you of them? A tremor of uncertainty rippled through the gathering. The reality was now undeniable. They were trapped, their fates intertwined in a web spun tightly around Lord Ashcombe's abrupt demise. We could investigate, secrets embroiled in layers yet to be revealed. The teacups may offer more than just broken fragments if we pay heed to their designs, she mused, a glint of mischief illuminating her aged yet vivid countenance. A smattering of whispers enveloped them again. The sudden eerie perfection of their surroundings, the polished wood, the dim light, the ornately framed portraits, and the haunting stillness broken only by the thunderous storm, engendered a sense of foreboding that settled much too comfortably into the alcoves of unspoken malice. I believe we must not linger over what is dead, a voice trilled somewhere in the rear, with bitter sweetness churning like spoiled cream. Perhaps anxiety is far more infectious than murder, wouldn't you agree? With that, the remaining facade of courteousness began to fold under the weight of accusation, like velvet curtains sliding from their rails. Suspicion tangled up with confusion, spiraling furiously. Who among them could fathom the depths of deceit that lurked ahead? Then, as the last chime of calm relinquished itself to the rise of pounding rain, a secondary scream pierced the throat of deliberation. This one more visceral, more animalistic. The butler staggered back, pale of face, pointing towards the boarded door that had remained locked, only now cracking open slowly to reveal a disheveled figure stumbling in as though emerged from the depths of hell itself. Miss Foxley, she is gone. The assertion fell like a hammer. Dense and impacting, Miss Marple stood, her heart racing. Suspicion ached, yet a keen excitement thrummed in her veins. She stepped towards the chamber, pulse emboldened, as the sudden rush of dread echoed through the growing turmoil. With every inch closer to unraveling the truth, she felt the ground beneath them shift, because she understood that the shrouds of deceit were thickening, and within that cacophony of despair, she would expose the sinister roots of their lives, quietly poised for revelations that could splinter friendships and bones alike. As the thunder roared louder, she could almost taste the electricity in the air, an adrenaline rush, ridden with urgency, and suddenly the act of resolution felt necessary. Before her stood many secrets now exposed like raw wounds, and with them lay a path unfurling beyond mere shadows, a darkness that twisted wickedly through the Ashcombe estate, waiting for Miss Marple to shine her light upon it. Chapter 3. Shadows of Suspicion. The clamour of confusion had barely settled when a sudden crash echoed from the gloom of the hallway, instantly shattering the remnants of decorum among the guests. Miss Marple spun on her heel as the heavy wooden door of the study swung wide, revealing Mrs. Burnett, her hair wildly disheveled, her expression an unsettling mix of horror and disbelief. He was in the library, she gasped, clutching the doorframe as though it were a lifeline. I just saw a figure slip out, someone I did not recognize. The storm played a sinister accomplice outside, raining black sheets of water against the windows as her words fell like leaden weights into the already suffocating atmosphere. Miss Marple's heart raced with the thrill of revelation, for the disappearance of the butterfly cup had morphed into much larger enigmas unfolding within the Ashcombe estate. She instinctively moved through the huddled group of guests, who leaned toward one another in conspiratorial whispers, their eyes darting with a mix of fear and suspicion. She bore down upon Mrs. Burnett, her keen gaze searching for insight through the trembling veil of shock. A figure, you say? Can you describe this person? Just a shadow, I swear. But they moved like a wraith, a form slipping between what was there and what was not, Mrs. Burnett stammered, her eyes flitting nervously around the room. Perhaps the storm deceives us, or perhaps it covers for someone. Miss Marple's mind turned, quickly, shadows falling into place like pieces of an intricate puzzle. The storm might have disoriented some, cloaked the intentions of the guilty, but it failed to obscure the truth that lay at the heart of the matter. You might be onto something curious, my dear. The very fabric of this estate is woven with secrets, yet tonight it feels like a tapestry coming undone. The fleeting moment of her contemplative silence was interrupted by Lady Beatrice, who stepped forward with an imperious glint in her eye. Mrs. Burnett, perhaps you mistake your paranoia for truth. We find ourselves cornered within these rain-soaked walls, with death laying claim to lives unguarded. Don't let the tempest outside fuel your imagination. Her tone was cool, too cool, and Miss Marple noted the slight quiver in her authoritative stance, revealing layers of strain masked beneath a polished exterior. Yet it is precisely the imagination we must engage tonight, Miss Marple returned, her voice edged with mild defiance. One must always be keen to entertain every possibility, no matter how dark. After all, we are hosting a murder. It would be foolish to disregard the arrival of shadows merely as phantoms. Around her, the tension rippled. Each guest leaned in just a fraction further, as though they were drawn into her orbit. Murmurs slithered around the group, and during this disquiet, Miss Marple's keen eyes fell upon a scrap of parchment that had fallen from beneath Lord Ashcombe's desk, its ink smeared but distinctly readable. She knelt to retrieve it, the candlelight flickering as shadows danced wickedly across the surge of their metamorphosing truths. Interesting, indeed, she mused, the quiet urgency in her voice compelling the room into stillness. As she deciphered the words, a pattern of urgency emerged. A financial meeting hastily arranged, one that hinted at a desperation to settle unspoken debts that danced delicately along the edges of the familial ties between the guests. A meeting arranged for this very evening, just prior to the gathering. Lord Ashcombe feared something tragic might occur, she announced, her voice slicing through the oppressive air. Who, I wonder, would wish to incite such turmoil? Perhaps someone with much to gain from a sudden demise, Mr. Henstridge interjected sharply, the colour draining from his face. How transparently evident their motives may be with the right conditions. Or perhaps someone with deep entanglements to sever, with much to keep hidden, Miss Marple returned, her tone edged with irony. All of you, encapsulated in your polite farce, Yet is it not the tiniest fault lines that reveal a great chasm? Mr. Henstridge, your eagerness to point the finger is telling in itself. Henstridge swallowed hard, his poker face unravelling, as he shot a glance towards Lady Beatrice, whose cool veneer began to chip. Let us not play the blame game when our environment is so fraught. Let us focus on discovering the truth. Yes, Miss Marple replied, a smile caressing her lips as she observed their expressions. And we must also remember that this storm leaves us marooned together, prickling with underlying tensions. It brings forth fears that can shatter facades, revealing motives that lie just below the surface of civility. Just then, through the profound silence that followed, the echoes of reticent whispers came alive again in sharp tones, suffused with discontent. Who are we to judge one another when we do not even know what shadows we each carry? Came a low voice from one of the darker corners of the room, a voice belonging to an indignant yet observant guest. Spurred by the rising chaos, Miss Marple felt the surge of adrenaline urging her to explore deeper into this web of deceit. Perhaps we should retrace our steps, and a shriek pierced the air again, wretched and strident, slicing through the din like a knife through flesh. The library! Someone's taken something! It was a cry from Miss Foxley, who emerged from the gloom, her visage paler than the moonlight creeping through the unseen windows. The case containing the precious items has been disturbed. With a heart that raced with both dread and exhilaration, Miss Marple moved closer to Miss Foxley, the urgency of the moment saturating her senses. What precisely is missing? She pressed, swiftly noting the shifting of eyes around the room, each glance weaving a fabric of collective guilt and uncertain loyalty. Nothing less than a diamond brooch belonging to Lady Beatrice, Miss Foxley gasped, fear dripping from her voice, like the rain pouring against the great house's stone walls. It was secured in the library until now. I swear I left it untouched. A tense silence fell upon the room like the curtain of a somber play, a varying ensemble of incredulous eyes turning toward Lady Beatrice, whose complexion had gone grey beneath the sheen of her previously impeccable demeanour. The storm's assurances echoed outside, carrying with them the fury of secrets yearning to surface, while within these four walls a new storm raged, this time one brewed of treachery. Isn't it interesting? Lady Beatrice finally broke the silence, her voice icy and sharp. How amidst calamity, something as precious as trust can vanish without a trace. Her words lingered, unexpectedly foreboding. Miss Marple's mind raced with calculations, weighing every possibility as her heart hammered against her ribs. How finely layered this blurred reality had become, and as a chill swept through the room, pushing her instincts to the fore, she understood in a flash that they were closer to an unsettling truth than any of them wished to admit. Then she felt it, a tightening in the air, a cloud of tension drawing tighter as if holding its breath. Somewhere, amid those gathered in the dimly lit drawing room, a reckoning awaited. But it was a reckoning neither of them could prepare for. Suddenly, from the corner, a scuffle erupted, a message knocked from a hand, a scream muffled, a shape that slipped out through the crack of the door, and one of their own vanished into the storm-ridden night. With the rush of dread now swelling within her, Miss Marple braced herself. The very heartbeat of the Ashcombe estate trembled, as truths so carefully buried began to claw their way to the surface. Here was a revelation that would delve deeper than theft. It would trample through the bittersweet veil of pretenses and frame a darkness none dared embrace. As the thunder growled and lightning illuminated deceptions, she felt the truth shift and beckon with its siren call. "Quick," she projected, her voice piercing through the cacophony. "We must split up. No one leaves this house until we unravel what is truly hidden in the shadows of this storm." With hearts pounding and fear vibrating through their bodies, they rushed to obey, entering into the swirling chaos of this elaborate night and putting Miss Marple at the center of an intricate dance among whispers, secrets, and the deep, unnerving shadows that threatened to consume them all. Chapter 4. The Vanishing Will. A piercing scream cut through the increasingly oppressive gloom, ricocheting against the walls like the clap of thunder outside. It belonged to Lady Beatrice, who stood rooted in the doorway of the library, her face ashen and wide-eyed, clutching a stack of papers that trembled in her grip. "It's gone! The will! The original will has vanished!" The storm raged unabated, rain lashing against the windows, emphasizing the chaos brewing beneath the estate's superficially elegant veneer. Miss Marple felt the tension in the room thicken palpably, a coiling serpent ready to strike, as guests exchanged glances, fraught with suspicion and fear. "Are we to believe that another shadow has slipped through without our notice?" Lady Lucretia hissed, stepping closer to her friend, her voice trembling as she eyed the others in the room, as if assessing threats among them. The lightning outside flashed, illuminating the parlor for a fleeting moment, revealing Miss Foxley's look of horrified disbelief, followed closely by a murmur of confusion that fluttered through the guests like the wings of startled birds. "Please," Miss Marple urged, her voice steady amidst the turmoil. "There must be a rational explanation. Lady Beatrice, what do you mean by the original will? Did you not keep it locked away?" She took a step forward, her keen eyes piercing through the panic swirling in the air. "It was in the safe. I swear it was." Lady Beatrice's voice trembled as she blinked rapidly, trying to gather her thoughts, each word a chisel, carving into the fragility of the moment. "I had it just before dinner, when I conversed with Lord Ashcombe. He wanted to ensure everything was in order as we faced potential tribulations." Her voice dropped for emphasis, her porcelain composure cracked by the weight of her own admission. "Whose name was on it?" Miss Marple inquired, her curiosity pricked. "I don't recall. It was all in such a flurry. We were—" Lady Beatrice stuttered, the words tumbling out, but Miss Marple noticed how her eyes darted toward Mr. Henstridge, whose placid demeanor now belied an undercurrent of something darker lurking beneath. "An oversight, perhaps, easily corrected," Mr. Henstridge interjected, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. The crinkle at the corners of his eyes betrayed his feigned calm. "But what if it has been taken? Now that would surely give an edge to someone. Something more sinister." "Less intrigue, Mr. Henstridge," Miss Marple said sharply, her voice rising above the disarray. "Why, all this suspense has only served to highlight your own motives. You stand to gain should Lord Ashcombe's legacy disappear." Silence fell abruptly, thickening the atmosphere in the room as all eyes turned toward Henstridge, who bristled at the implication. "You misconstrue my intentions, madam. I am here out of loyalty and friendship, not to gain from anyone's downfall." "Yes, loyalty." Lady Lucretia's voice dripped with skepticism as she folded her arms, a shadow crossing her face. "Yet people hide their true natures in moments like these, don't you think?" "Mayhap," Henstridge shot back, his tone barely above a whisper, yet every syllable dripped with palpable intensity. "But what if it was you who had your fingers in the safe? Who among us wouldn't want to secure their own future?" It's bloody tempting, especially standing on the precipice of ruin. Gentlemen, I will have you. Both take a step back, Miss Marple commanded, the authority in her voice stampeding into the squabbling protests, silencing them. This is not merely a game of shadows and accusations. Something deeper festers here. She turned her gaze upon Lady Beatrice once more, keen to expose the cracks in her facade. You are sure of the will's location, yet it remains a mystery, and none but you have seen it since. I'd never steal from Lord Ashcombe. I have no need to. Lady Beatrice's voice trembled, though Miss Marple observed a slight twitch in her lips. You can't possibly think I would be, but who would benefit were it to go missing? Miss Marple's words came out like ripples in a still pond, disturbing the collective consciousness. Have you ever thought about that? Not only from a perspective of financial gain, but perhaps also a way to correct a misjudgment. Misjudgment? Lady Beatrice echoed incredulously, her brows drawing together in an intricate knot. I dare say a rather spurious allegation to throw. Dearest Beatrice, you've tangled yourself in your own words. Sacrificing a friend can be the most expedient means to secure one's place. Miss Marple's gaze was unyielding, measuring the weight of Lady Beatrice's growing agitation. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls, spectators to the unfolding drama. The contest of wills escalated rapidly, tension thickening the air, each party further entrenching themselves, unwilling to reveal their hidden motives. The lightning outside blazed again, illuminating a scrawled note on the table near the safe, unnoticed in the melee. The ink was freshly smeared. "Excuse me?" A tentative voice broke through, and everyone turned to see Miss Foxley, her panic barely subsiding. "I may have seen something before." The screaming started. "What do you mean?" Miss Marple queried, sharp as the thunder rattling the windows. I was cleaning up in the library before the guests arrived. I heard hushed whispers and saw someone leave. I couldn't be sure. Until just before Lady Beatrice screamed, I saw him slip something beneath his coat. She pointed toward Mr. Henstridge, but I wasn't certain what he took. Gasps filled the room as all eyes shifted to Henstridge, his expression hardening, the mask of civility cracking at long last. "You're twisting my words, casting aspersions where none belong." A sudden crash broke through the storm. The window nearest to Lady Beatrice shattered, a torrent of rain sweeping inside as a dark figure loomed just beyond the threshold, their features obscured by the rain. The figure lingered for a fleeting moment before disappearing into the storm, leaving behind a haunting echo of truth yet unresolved. "Someone's out there, someone with the will," Lady Beatrice cried, in a voice filled with terror, clinging to Miss Marple's arm, as though seeking protection. Panic erupted, but amidst the chaos, Miss Marple felt a pulse of clarity emerging. Realization began to form when a gasp from Miss Foxley shifted her focus back to the safe, the fragmented glimmer of truth, sparking curiosity once more, the aura of something essential, something vital that had slipped from their grasp, potentially presenting itself as the fulcrum of the night's promises and denials. "Quick!" Miss Marple's voice cut through the cacophony, her mind racing. "We shall all remain here while I assess this dreadful scene. The very nature of this evening rests upon what secrets lie hidden beneath these tempests, but I fear we may just have crossed into the depths of a far darker truth." And as the last of her words echoed among the walls, the winds howled in a twisted lament, ushering an unknown revelation toward the very core of Ashcombe Estate, twisting the fabric of trust beyond recognition. Shadows loomed large, envy uncoiled its tendrils, and betrayal dripped like rain. This storm would bring forth more than merely a will. It would expose the tangled webs of the human heart, dragging everyone into a reckoning they may wish to evade. Miss Marple steeled herself as she began to piece together the truths interwoven among her guests. But something, or someone, was lurking in the darkness, and she sensed that the night held more than mere thunder and rain. The chase for the will was merely the beginning, hinting at a far deeper conspiracy that threatened to consume them all. Chapter 5. A Note Unseen. The shrill scrape of a chair against the floor punctuated the suffocating silence, sending a chill down Miss Marple's spine as she entered the library, the air dense with tension and shadows. Just then, amid the breathing storm outside, a single flash of lightning illuminated the corner of the room, revealing a forgotten envelope lying half-hidden beneath a stack of leather-bound volumes. With the thunder booming in the distance, she reached for it, her heart quickening with anticipation. As her fingers brushed the cool paper, an inexplicable dread clutched her insides. Just as she barely lifted it, a sudden crash of thunder echoed, shaking the very foundations of the estate. The commotion from the drawing room faded momentarily, but Miss Marple could feel the eyes of her guests boring into her back, expectant and rife with suspicion. This perilous night had promised chaos, and the electric crackle in the air hinted at revelations uncovered. The envelope was unsealed, its edges frayed, and the familiar, looped handwriting inside sent a shiver through her. It was Lord Ashcombe's. She unfolded the note, its ink running slightly as if it had soothed whispering secrets in a recent downpour. The words, although faint, spoke of strained relationships and debts unmet, final warnings addressed to someone living now in the shadow of Lord Ashcombe's reputation. Beware the hidden debts. They will demand more than coins to settle them, it read, ink swirling with an ominous undertone that pierced through the shroud of the storm. Miss Marple's thoughts raced, especially now, with suspicions brewing like tempestuous clouds just beyond the grimy panes. Why had Lord Ashcombe felt the need to prepare such a message? "Someone is tangled in more than this will," she murmured, the words barely escaping her lips. The sense of connection seemed to stretch further than she had initially projected, and the hints of desperation punctured through the walls she had meticulously constructed around her perceptions of each guest's motives. The drawing-room door swung open, the stormy winds gusting in unsettlingly. As Lady Beatrice glided into the library, her expression contorting between concern and curiosity. "Miss Marple, what are you doing here? We need you back. There's been a further development." Her voice tremored while her gaze flitted uneasily between the unsealed envelope and Miss Marple herself, whirling in a frantic dance of evasive glances. "Further development?" Miss Marple inquired, folding the letter and returning it to the safety of her pocket as she stepped closer. "You found something more pertinent than the missing will, I gather. A note, didn't you hear? It's more than just a matter of a missing document. Someone has accused Mr. Henstridge of theft again, but this time we're yet uncertain." Lady Beatrice's eyes flickered momentarily to the pocket Miss Marple could no longer hide, and the wretched tension in the air seemed to amplify. "Accusations can be as tangled as the night itself," Miss Marple interjected mildly, folding her hands as she dissected the nuances of Lady Beatrice's demeanor. "And yet you stand here alone. You've not joined the fray over there. One could assume you possess something of utmost importance." The shadow of guilt flashed across Lady Beatrice's features, a cracking of her porcelain facade. "I am merely seeking answers, as we all are, Miss Marple," she replied, a tremor creeping into her voice. "But perhaps you're right. Perhaps we are all trying to secure our own futures. Is that not the essence of humanity?" Miss Marple made a swift deduction about the implications of her words, a source of fear shimmering beneath the surface. "Your friendship, my dear Beatrice," she stated with a pointed glance, "could mask something deeper that you dare not face. All of you stand on the precipice of ruin, and it is in the vulnerability that secrets claw to be free." A flash of anger rippled through Lady Beatrice, her frustration radiating like a tempest. "How dare you suggest that I could be—" she began, only to be interrupted as the distant sound of footsteps echoed barely above a whisper, perilously close in the labyrinthine halls outside. Both women fell silent, their breaths measuring each muffled heartbeat. "Something brews beyond these walls," Miss Marple whispered, her sharp intuition ignited. "Allow me a moment." She beckoned her companion to stay as she edged toward the door, the storm beyond howling with a ferocity that echoed her growing unease. Just as she stepped into the hallway, the flickering candlelight exposed a movement. The back of a figure, hastily closing a door at the far end, just as the clock chimed ominously. "Halt!" Miss Marple commanded, her voice slicing through the murky air, but the shadow could not be caught. It slipped into the deeper recesses of the estate, moving furtively. With sudden urgency, Miss Marple turned back to Lady Beatrice, her heart racing anew. "We need to follow. That was not an innocent passerby. They are involved deeper than we perceive." As they dashed after the figure, the estate groaned above the tempest, lights fluttering with trepidation. Somewhere in the depths of the Ashcombe estate, where echoes of the past reverberated among cloth and decorum, secrets were not just lurking. They were burrowing into the very core of its inhabitants, and with each step Miss Marple took, the scope of treachery expanded beyond mere theft. A rattling echoed from the library, sending a jolt through Miss Marple's core, an unsettling indication that something had been left incomplete. She could sense the gathering storm wasn't merely outside, it bled through corridors rich with whispers of betrayal, and time pressed down like the weight of an unresolved will. They rounded the corner, dread pooling in her stomach, but just then the door swung shut, locking tight with an echoing click. A gasp escaped Lady Beatrice's lips as all breath seemed imprisoned in that moment, the cold grip of reality tightening over them. "What has occurred?" she whispered, her bravado shattered back to vulnerability. In that instant, Miss Marple's thoughts crystallized. A grim realization rooted in the depths of betrayal flooded into consciousness. The stakes were escalating wildly, and they teetered precariously on the edge of discovery. That hidden letter had unleashed not only their hopes, but also the shackles of unspoken pasts still gripping each guest within Ashcombe's walls. But now, not one of them was safe from the storm surging forward. Would they all face its reckoning together, or would one vanish just like the will itself, sweeping away the truth into the raging night? The ensuing silence deepened, heavy with anticipation, as the darkness surged beyond, claiming more than they had anticipated. Chapter 6. The Errant Footsteps. A scream shattered the heavy silence of the hallway, cutting through the pounding rain and howling wind outside like a blade through soft fabric. Miss Marple shot upright, her heart racing as the fear-laden echoes of Lady Beatrice's voice lingered in the damp air. "Help! Someone! Stop him!" The urgency in her plea sent a jolt through Miss Marple, propelling her forward into the darkened depths of Ashcombe Estate, where every shadow seemed to conspire against her. As she and Lady Beatrice sprinted toward the sound, the light from a single, flickering candle illuminated the floor in patches, revealing something troubling. At the junction ahead, a footprint stood stark against the polished wood, its outline unmistakably large and booted, yet unsettlingly different. Beneath the tremor of pulsing thunder, the imprint appeared almost fresh, a cryptic enigma among the tangled strands of suspicion that encased the evening. It was not just mud. It was a dark residue, the kind that came from far deeper than the outdoors, perhaps from the very bowels of what one might call a hidden intent. "Look," Miss Marple exclaimed, kneeling beside the mysterious print, her mind racing. Lady Beatrice hesitated, her earlier bravado cracking under the pressure of this discovery. "What does that mean?" she inquired nervously, glancing back toward the drawing room, where whispered accusations had crescendoed to a tumultuous uproar. Miss Marple's keen eyes studied the footprint, and her instincts propelled her thoughts forward. This is no ordinary trace," she murmured, her fingers brushing against the residue with delicate caution. "There's a heaviness to it, a certain purpose." She traced the outline. Heavy, deliberate, perhaps made by someone determined to remain unidentified. "So you think—" Lady Beatrice began, her voice trembling. Miss Marple interrupted, her thoughts crystallizing amidst the howling storm as one horrifying possibility flared to life. "I suspect this could belong to our elusive figure, one who fled moments before we arrived. I have questions, Lady Beatrice, which you may not wish to hear." "Me?" Letting out a breath that hinted at her growing fear, Lady Beatrice's eyes darted nervously, betraying the calm facade she had attempted to maintain. "I have done nothing but seek answers." "Seek answers?" Miss Marple asked, a wry smile touching her lips, like a moth flitting toward a flame, perhaps. "What do you fear to unearth, my dear?" They both paused as a distant echo of footsteps reverberated down the corridor, a sound capitalizing on the enveloping tension. Lady Beatrice flinched, her posture tightening. "Perhaps we should return to the drawing room, Miss Marple. It is reckless to dally here. What if they return?" "On the contrary," Miss Marple rose, her resolve solidifying. "It is imperative to observe this footprint closely, and you must tell me, who among us bears the heaviest of souls?" "Mr. Henstridge," Lady Beatrice offered in haste, glancing toward the drawing room as though expecting him to appear at any moment, unkempt and avaricious. "He is always at the center of turmoil." "Mr. Henstridge," Miss Marple repeated thoughtfully, "but there's something deeper. Underneath the glimmer of wealth lies much more than mere greed. Accusations spiral like smoke when trust abandons us." The clock tower struck ominously, each toll echoing in the growing darkness, urging Miss Marple onward, fueling her insatiable need to illuminate the obscured truths lurking around them. She turned toward Lady Beatrice, who seemed now a mere figment of the successful socialite she portrayed. "You have known Lord Ashcombe longer than any of us. Did he harbor fear of particular debts, secrets that pressed like a heavy mist upon his conscience, that would drive him to realize this will?" Tentative admission flickered across Lady Beatrice's features, but her lips struggled to form the reticent thoughts in her mind. Lord Ashcombe was generous, but yes, there were murmurs of his involvement in the trades too dubious for polite conversation. At that moment, a sudden shriek escaped from the drawing room an ephemeral echo pulling at the edges of reality. Miss Marple's heart thundered in response, instincts igniting as she turned, propelled by an undeniable urgency. "This way. We must return." As they swiftly retraced their steps, Miss Marple paused at the junction, her gaze drawn back to that imprint, a riddle left behind screaming for resolution. She knelt again to examine it. The shape was unmistakable, almost poetic in its clarity. But what lay hidden there? What secret had been left to ferment in the shadows? Another sound, heavy breathing, caught her attention. Miss Marple regained her feet, adrenaline coursing through her veins. In the rear of the dimly lit hallway, she stood rigid. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, a note of dread threading through her voice. "Miss Marple, we should hasten. We cannot. No, stay." Her voice was firm, a barrier against her rising fears, spinning in sharp contrast to her vulnerability. "Do you see? It may be an innocent guest, or it could be the very figure we seek. We must give it mere moments." As though the shadows themselves recoiled at her words, a shape materialized at the edge of the dim light. In stark contrast to the buoyant encounters from earlier, the figure slipped cautiously into view, the unmistakable back of a man. "Who's there?" Miss Marple called out, her voice as steady as the pressure in her chest. The figure stilled, then took a quick step backwards, flinging themselves into an adjacent corridor, barely glancing back. "Stop," Miss Marple commanded, surging forward with Lady Beatrice at her heels. The echo of their footsteps collided with the approaching storm as they pursued the fleeting figure deeper into the estate. But fate had other plans. Just as they reached the corner, the flickering light snuffed out, plunging them into darkness. An intense silence fell, thick as the rain-soaked air that clung to their skin, rendering the world to an abyss of uncertainty. Before she could call out again, the faintest whisper reached Miss Marple's straining ear. Cold and chilling, it carried an unmistakable note of warning, hiding within its breath. "Beware of the debts." The sound of hurried feet echoed in chaotic retreat, a grim promise that something unspeakably dark lay beneath their gathering storm. Stilling her breath, Miss Marple's pulse raced as realization solidified. The dance of suspicion had drawn them irresistibly toward the precipice, where a hidden truth lingered. One thing was certain: a reckoning was coming. The storm had merely begun, and the ghosts of Ashcombe Estate were awakening. "Quick, Lady Beatrice." Miss Marple turned, her heart racing with palpable dread. "Someone is in peril, awaiting judgment. We must not falter." But as they rushed toward the darkness, the echoes of the figure faded beyond reach, rendering their desperate pursuit just a whisper, leaving behind nothing but the chill of a darkening night, and a revelation that beckoned them closer. Chapter 7. The web begins to unravel. A strangled cry splintered the silence, a sound sharp enough to pierce the dense fog of night that draped the Ashcombe Estate. The wind howled, a deafening accompaniment to the desperation echoing down the dimly lit corridor. Miss Marple whipped around, heart pounding like the merciless rain battering against the ancient windows. "Lady Beatrice, did you hear that?" she hissed, her senses heightened, the very walls caving in on them as if they conspired to hide a ghastly secret. The lanterns flickered erratically, their feeble glow dancing nervously along the farthest corners, revealing just enough to expose a figure hunched in the shadows, desperation writ large on his visage. "Get back," a voice rasped, a dark silhouette blending seamlessly with the interwoven cloak of night. The rustle of fabric, and the scuffle of hurried steps sent adrenaline surging through Miss Marple. But as the figure bolted past her, she caught a glimpse of something, a flicker of recognition among the chaos. It was Mr. Henstridge, his face ghostly pale, his eyes wide with panic. Something was amiss. He was not the hunter, but the hunted. "Help!" he stammered, glancing over his shoulder as if the very darkness bore down upon him, ready to snare him. In the next breath, he turned and raced down the passageway, disappearing into the increasing gloom, leaving a tremor in the air. "This is madness," Lady Beatrice cried, breathless with a worry Miss Marple could hardly ignore. "What does he seek to escape from?" "Only one way to find out," Miss Marple urged, pulling Lady Beatrice forward. Deliberate and focused, they hurried after the fleeting shadow, urgency propelling them. "There's more afoot here than mere shadow games." She could feel the tension weaving itself tighter around them with each step, echoing the heavy air of dread that suffused the estate. The intertwined candlelight and looming darkness offered stark contrasts, amplifying the outlines of portraits staring down with spectral disapproval. Still, advancing through the narrow corridor, Miss Marple's attention was caught by a peculiar sight. Near the door to the library, a silver cufflink glinted on the polished floorboards, an expensive piece often paired with Mr. Henstridge's tailored suit. "How intriguing," she murmured, kneeling to retrieve it, her mind racing. A mislaying of this nature was hardly accidental. "He's been here recently," she continued, not glancing at Lady Beatrice, "and whatever he is running from is not something of mere imagination." But just as her insights began to crystallize, a clamor rose beyond the door of the drawing room, a discordant blend of muffled voices rising and falling like a swell of eerie music. "They're arguing again," Lady Beatrice hissed, eyes wide with fear. "Indeed, and that discord may hold not just secrets, but truths," Miss Marple replied, with a keen glint in her eye, lucid determination coursing through her. "Come, we must find where they are diverting their attention, lest our quarry slip through our grasp." Inside the drawing room, the atmosphere teetered on the edge of chaos. Some guests stood in a huddle, faces alive with agitation, while others milled about anxiously, casting glances toward the door. Mrs. Travel, a local dignitary, waved her hands as she spat words thick with disdain. "You think it easy to trifle with us? The man is a menace." "Or a harbinger of our truths," Miss Marple interjected, calmly, her voice pure as a clarion call slicing through the clamor. Turning slowly toward the gathered assembly, she beckoned their attention. "May I remind you that while voices rise in distress, we may be overlooking the core of our predicament. Fear breeds division, my friends. We must unify against the true unknown." "What are you suggesting, Madeline?" Lord Pembroke challenged, stepping closer, his face taut with distrust. "We are no children playing elaborate games. We are here to address what exactly?" She pressed him, her eyes narrowing. "A theft? A missing will? Or perhaps something darker? I offer no conclusive answers, only the faintest strings of interwoven motives, each dark as our stormy skies." The group shifted, unease rippling through them, like a sudden gust, fanning embers back to flame. Each set of eyes held their own fear, as every moment thickened with tension. "Each of us has our secrets," Lady Beatrice muttered, casting a sidelong glance at everyone in the room. "What if Lord Ashcombe's legacy fades into nothingness because of our own failings?" "Not nothingness, but rather deliberate silence," Miss Marple proclaimed, sensing the conspiracy extending beyond the tangible. Our hearts harbor darker impulses, and in our pursuit of riches and reputations, each of us may have felt the rains of desperation. But what could we possibly stand to gain? Snapped a voice from the periphery. It was Miss Tyrrell, the sheltered spinster, eyes flickering between timid and combative. This is not mere currency at stake. This is all of our futures. Indeed, Miss Marple replied, allowing the silence to stretch for a heartbeat. And yet, I find it puzzling that none of you seem worried about what that future entails. Who amongst you could bear witnessing ruin, and indeed facilitate it? As the room began to fracture under the weight of her words, an unsettling realization passed through the assembly, sharp as glass, a realization that darkened the atmosphere even further. They were left with nothing but suspicion, each glance a dagger between allies. But beneath that turmoil, Miss Marple's keen perceptions surfaced, a thought piercing sharply through the mist. "The cufflink, our beloved Mr. Henstridge," she began, pulling Lady Beatrice closer. "Can you wonder who else may be aiming for a gain amidst this maelstrom? Pins can be dropped without resolve. Can you tell me of any conversations had with him recently?" Suddenly, the door swung violently, the sounds of heavy footsteps reverberating as a gust of wind bolted through the room. The opportunistic and oft-cynical Mr. Henstridge reappeared, casting a furtive glance over his shoulder, his eyes stark with fear. I had no choice," he gasped, panting like an injured animal. "They're coming. It's all spiraled out of control." The guests recoiled, expressions blanketed with confusion and alarm, as Miss Marple met Henstridge's gaze, piercing him with her unwavering intensity. "Out of control," she echoed, a chill whispering through her soul. "Or are you simply running from a truth you cannot conceal?" And just as the sinister revelation hung thick in the air, like a noose tightening around their necks, a crash reverberated from the corridor, a sharp reminder of treachery unfurling within the walls of Ashcombe. A sudden scream flared, so distant, yet hauntingly close. "Stay where you are," echoed a voice, cold and commanding. At that moment, Miss Marple's heart dropped, a dreadful instinct clawing its way from the shadows. An unspeakable truth latched upon her consciousness, and her gut churned with apprehension. "It seems we've awakened not just the spirits within, but those eager to silence us forever," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "We must—" But the words died in her throat as the lights shattered, plunging the estate into a terrifying darkness. A figure lurched forward, and then silence. Deep disbelief eroded every ounce of decorum. The storm outside could not match the tempest that swirled within these walls. With danger closing in, like the very fog that embraced Ashcombe, Miss Marple understood one immutable truth. There would be no easy escape. The web was drawing tighter, and victory awaited only one resolve. "Find him," Miss Marple demanded urgently, dread twisting her stomach. But even as they shouted, a new hollowness descended like a pall, compelling them, each step dragging them deeper into an abyss, where the only certainty was danger itself. Chapter 8. A Game of Alibis. A thunderous crash echoed through the Ashcombe estate, splintering the night like a bone snapping underfoot. The walls trembled, a fleeting tremor that seemed to awaken centuries of dread and despair trapped within the antiquated structure. Miss Marple's heart raced as she braced herself, the pall of her surroundings thick and suffocating, enveloping her senses in a feverish haze of uncertainty. Just as she and Lady Beatrice gathered their wits, a shivering scream, a sound woven from sheer terror, slipped through the air, reverberating off the cold, stone walls. "Did you hear that?" Lady Beatrice gasped, her breath quickening. The flickering candlelight cast ever-changing shadows, illuminating the faces of the assembled guests, a motley assemblage of expressions ranging from confusion to sheer terror. Desperation crawled into Miss Marple's throat like a vengeful spirit, urging her to act. "Stay here," Miss Marple commanded, the glint of resolve unmistakable in her steel-blue eyes. She moved toward the threshold of the drawing room, every instinct bristling with urgency. In the oppressive silence following the scream, she sensed an unseen power, a dark force pulsing through the night, a disquiet that buried itself deep within her bones. "They have secrets," she breathed, half to herself, "and this is but the beginning." As she stepped into the drawing room, the atmosphere shifted, a charged electric hum arcing from guest to guest like lightning. Mr. Henstridge stood at the far wall, his pallid face illuminated by the flicker of a lone lamp. "I swear I saw someone," he started, but his voice faltered, swallowed by the weight of suspicion hanging heavily in the air. "Stop," Miss Marple interjected, advancing toward him, her gaze piercing and intense. "Before you elaborate your fears, might I remind everyone that we are not as alone as our illusions suggest? There are eyes that observe even our most clandestine thoughts." "More riddles," Lord Pembroke snapped, his impatience evident, betraying a tension that underlay his composed facade. "Let's speak plainly, Miss Marple. What do you propose?" "An alibi," she replied, her tone unfurling with authority. "We are clutched by shadows, yes, but shadows often offer clarity to those who wish to see. Each of you has been marked tonight, marked by misfortune and shadows of deceit." "How dare you?" Mrs. Travell spat, her indignation flashing like the lightning outside. "I'm merely here to pay my respects. This is uncalled for." "Is it?" Miss Marple murmured, a slow smile creeping across her lips, reading the ripple of disdain many shared for Mrs. Travell. "But where were you during the commotion? I find it curious your movements are so conveniently absent from the memory shared here." "Perhaps," Miss Terrell piped up, voice shaking, "but I was in the conservatory, tending to the orchids. Is that not a suitable alibi?" "Hardly suitable," Miss Marple remarked, eyes narrowing in calculating precision. "You mean to say you remained in a glass house while the storm raged, while screams echoed, and yet it is your own perfumed presence that hovers like a shroud over this gathering, unlike the rancid smoke that has begun permeating the air." Suspicions returned to Mrs. Travell and Lord Pembroke, their faces paling. "No one else spoke of incendiaries tonight," Pembroke countered coolly, though the tremor in his voice betrayed a fear he could not disguise. "Precisely," Miss Marple continued, "and that is where the shroud thickens. Let us not dismiss the matter of the cufflink I found in the corridor. Mr. Henstridge's, is it not? Forgotten in haste or carelessness?" "Dreadfully careless," Henstridge murmured, a layer of anxiety underscoring his words. "A silver cufflink," she interrupted sharply, her gaze hardening. "As precious as our will to conceal the tensions surrounding Lord Ashcombe's considerable estate. Are there myriad debts at play? Indeed. Yet tell me, why were you in such haste to discard an article so unique to your gown?" The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, each syllable a calculated wound on the hushed assembly. Gasps echoed against the panelled walls, a chord of unrest swelling like the coming storm breaking at their windows. "Miss Marple, what's your point?" Lady Beatrice demanded, inhaling sharply as the tension twisted into something more dire. In these moments of heat, truth Lies revealed, Miss Marple insisted, eyes scanning the room, glancing from face to face. Consider the moments leading up to the consternation of tonight. Mrs. Travell's ire against Henstridge, suffocated by jealousy, echoed attempts to deter his social ascent. Lord Pembroke's past betrayals offer him little reprieve from suspicion. What would he have to say if deeds turned against him? "Enough!" Pembroke exploded, stepping closer, his voice a deep growl. "We all have our flaws, Miss Marple. It does not grant you the right to interrogate indiscriminately. The very flaws that make us all potential carriers of ill tidings," she countered, her demeanor unwavering. "Tell me of that night, the last gathering before Lord Ashcombe's death. Who held the keys? Who heard the whispers? Each moment shared can lead paths to deceit." Outside, the storm raged on, lightning illuminating figures against the windows. Shadows danced and flickered, blocking and unblocking faces as if reproaching Miss Marple's every word. Lengthening, however, was the pulse of the darkness that lingered, a growing certainty that something more volatile brewed beneath the surface. Suddenly, a distinct noise cut through the taut tension, like a sliver of ice, sharp and sudden. All eyes turned to an unopened doorway beyond the drawing room, the sound echoing, a dull thud, then silence. "Who?" Lady Beatrice stammered. Fortified by instinct, Miss Marple darted toward the sound, Lady Beatrice hot on her heels. The door creaked ponderously as she pressed her palm against the cold wood, her intuition screaming for her to stand firm, to look beyond this realm of shadows for answers. And then the door swung open with a shuddering breath, revealing the pitch black of the adjoining hall. A figure lurched against the further shadows. "I know the truth," it whispered hoarsely, before a faint stream of light chimed out momentarily, revealing the slight frame of Miss Terrell. Drenched, trembling, a crystal vial clutched tightly in her hand, and with a deadly glint in her eye, she cried, "You'll all regret this." Before Miss Marple could respond, the shadows surged forward, engulfing them all, and the scream that had once pierced the night echoed anew, ready to cross into the realm of no return. Then, just as swiftly, everything faded, like a candle extinguished into black. The night held its breath, as Miss Marple braced for the unfurling tempest, the revelations yet to come crashing in waves. The game was only beginning, and the stakes were far deadlier than any of them could fathom. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. A sudden, bone-chilling scream erupted from the very core of Ashcombe, twisting through the air like a vengeful wraith. It cut short the thunder's percussion, causing every heart in the drawing-room to clench in alarm, and the crackling candlelight froze mid-flicker, casting grotesque shadows that danced malevolently across the myriad faces gathered within. Miss Marple felt the air grow dense with fear and apprehension, the weight of unspoken truths, pressing down on fragile bonds that had already begun to fray. "Miss Terrell," Lady Beatrice gasped, her hand fluttering to her throat. "What is happening?" Before Miss Marple could respond, she caught a glimpse of Miss Terrell's willowy form, trembling beneath the weight of the darkest revelation yet. The crystal vial she clutched looked disproportionate in her delicate grip, a potential harbinger of doom, glistening ominously with the specter of something not meant for human consumption. The storm outside raged darker, punctuating their unrest with violent flashes of lightning that illuminated the very essence of fear etched into the assembly's faces. "Stand back, all of you," thundered Mr. Henstridge, his desperation palpable. We may have been terrorized enough without turning on one another. You fear Miss Terrell, the one you mocked and belittled? Miss Marple interjected, her voice steady, piercing through the uproar. What have you to hide, Mr. Henstridge? Secrets ferment beneath your veneer of bravado. Secrets, Henstridge stammered, doubt creeping into his tone. The very fabric of your existence here is woven with dishonesty, dear Henstridge, she replied, stepping closer, the fire in her gaze like an unyielding beacon. Might I remind you of a cufflink, a token of your haste? A chill brutish enough to silence even the agitated wind crawled through the room, as Mrs. Travell, shaken to her core, pressed a hand to her mouth. What are you suggesting, Miss Marple? Only that the urgency of your actions speaks volumes of your culpability. Her words hung in the air like a fog rolling in from the sea. And yours too, Lady Travell. Have you not noted how the clamour of guilt shifts from one to another within this drawing-room? Each movement is a misstep toward revelation. Are we not drawn like moths to a flame, blinded by our desires? Enough! Lord Pembroke's voice cut through the murmur of whispers, his face hardening with defiance. We cannot have this farce continue. Miss Marple believes herself some kind of oracle. My past informs me merely of two choices, to condemn or be condemned. Miss Marple turned slowly, focusing her intention on Pembroke. Ah, the heavy weight of the past, Lord Pembroke. Like a shackle, it ensnares you, does it not? Whispers of betrayal, echoes of envy. Who would wish to shove you deeper into the mire of your making? Please, do enlighten us on your whereabouts tonight. With that, the atmosphere shifted once. Again, tension coiling tighter, wrapping around their throats as if to choke them under the weight of unsaid accusations. A game of truths, twisted beyond recognition. I was merely, Pembroke began, but cut himself off as Lady Beatrice interjected. Does it not dupe you, Pembroke? Did we not seek refuge from storm and emotion only to unravel further? Miss Marple deserves her say, for this gathering was never a remnant of coincidence, and your presence here seems more strategic than you care to admit. Strategic? A new voice, high and strident, rang through the gathering. Miss Travell, now emboldened by the shift, lifted her chin defiantly. What of you, Beatrice? Upstart rumors have trailed your name long before tonight's calamity. How can anyone trust the veracity of your heart? Silence, Henstridge interjected, his voice shuddering, born of that desperate fragility as yet untested. Sowing discord won't help us. We must rally if we've any hope of escaping this madness. Miss Marple's attention pivoted sharply back to the figure in the doorway, shifting from Miss Terrell clutching her vial, her denial exposing either anonor or dark intention. What is in that vial, dear Miss Terrell? She probed gently, but the unease rippled through the room. Only a remedy, Miss Terrell insisted, her voice tremulous but fiercely determined. A remedy for those in need. You can't comprehend. No, Miss Marple retorted, her sharp observation slicing through the clamour. And yet it is you who seems to require help rather dearly. Have we not speculated on the nature of Lord Ashcombe's demise? Wasn't it whispered that his health had taken a turn for the worse prior to his abduction? Your late-night visits could be construed as more than mere philanthropy. Miss Terrell shrank back, just as a sudden silence reigned supreme, shadows twisting beneath the crystalline light of the candles as if each step backward buried some morbid secret. You don't understand, she breathed, quaking with rage and fear, her grip tightening around the vial. I hardly need to understand your motives to see how easily they can be manipulated. Miss Marple replied, her voice cold and clear. "This vial, what of it, Miss Terrell?" Only the desperate wield such tools like confessions shouted into the night. The room held its breath, the storm breathing life into the stillness as the silhouettes flickered in trepidation. Just then, an authoritative knock crashed against the chamber door. A husk, resounding harbinger of the forces lurking beyond their fragile sanctuary, a sound so jarring it shattered the tension like glass. "Who?" Miss Marple called, heart racing anew. "Open up!" a voice barked, drenched with authority, sending ripples of fear tearing through the gathering. And in an instant, Miss Terrell's hand lunged backward, releasing the vial, shattering it against the stone floor in a cacophony of glass and liquid. A waft of something acrid filled the air, stirring terror deeper within the hearts of those present. As chaos unfurled anew against the violent backdrop of storm, Miss Marple turned sharply, realizing with a dawning horror that something far darker than mere ambition was afoot. The door creaked ominously, slowly swinging open to reveal a figure that sent chills spiraling through her spine, one that would rip the very fabric of their fragile alliances apart. In that instant, with shadows dancing and energies colliding, she understood there was no turning back. They were thrust deeper into the heart of a darkness that had been waiting, biding its time, and now threatened to consume them all. With the walls of Ashcombe closing in, she braced herself for the final confrontation, aware that the true murderer might very well be lurking close enough to wrap their hands around her throat. The night held its breath, and Miss Marple stood on the precipice, both shrouded in fear and emboldened by the feathers of truth. What chaos awaited thrust her into a web, woven of treachery, desperation, and dark revelation. The oscillating door and the cascade of secrets would soon unveil an answer, but not before the revelation turned their world upside down on the stormy winds of Ashcombe, and all she could do was brace for the fallout. Chapter 10. Secrets of the Past. A deafening crash reverberated through Ashcombe, a shattering tally of glass that momentarily eclipsed the storm's fury outside. Miss Marple's heart skipped as she turned, eyes wide as the realization sank in. The vial lay in shards upon the floor, a pool of shimmering liquid entwined with the shards of crystal, each fragment glistening like fallen stars. The acrid scent spiraled through the air, sending a wave of panic cresting over the others in the room, tangible and treacherous, as whispers of dread coursed through the gathering like a gnarled current. "Miss Terrell!" Lady Beatrice's voice pierced the murmurs, laden with incredulity and alarm as she turned to the trembling figure, now backed against the wall like a cornered creature. "What have you done?" "I didn't," Terrell stammered, her voice shaking as she fought against the ever-thickening atmosphere of tension. "You don't understand." "Understand what?" Henstridge flared, his bravado standing on the precipice of unraveling. "That you've summoned chaos into our midst? That you've all but ensured our doom?" "Silence!" Miss Marple's voice rose, cutting through the chaos with a steely control that commanded attention. The tension was palpable. The air crackled like the storm outside. Moving toward the overturned vial, she knelt, studiously examining the puddle of sullen liquid that glimmered on the marble floor. She could almost see the reticent anger and despair reflected in its surface, this confession cloaked in chaos. "What you hold is more than mere remedy, I fear," she murmured thoughtfully, distinct heat rising from the aftermath of what was potentially more lethal than they had dared to believe. This substance, what is it really, Miss Terrell? They will come for us, Terrell whispered, her gaze flitting to the door where the crash had sounded. They can't. They, Miss Marple interrupted sharply, her keen eyes narrowing. You're evading the truth. You seek to deflect attention from that which binds you to Lord Ashcombe's fate. Was he truly beyond help, or was there something darker lurking beneath your intentions? With each phrase, the shadows in the room seemed to lean closer, the night itself a conspirator in their tangled webs. Miss Terrell, seemingly about to succumb to her own shaking resolve, blinked furiously as if shaking off a fog. He deserved it, she hissed suddenly, the resolve in her voice surprising even herself. He was a menace to us all, and I spent years trying to help him. They'll label me the shunned savior, or bury me alongside him. No one understands the depths of his manipulation. Suddenly, as thunder rumbled ominously from outside, Miss Marple stood, emboldened by the firm belief that she had touched upon the heartbeat of darkness. So it is manipulation that drove him toward his doom, then, she said, her voice now steady and cutting through the din. You worry for your own reputation, rather than for your friend, who now lies cold in the earth. Lady Travell glanced at the others, her face ashen, as though longing to absorb the truths already simmering under the surface. Why, Miss Marple? What makes you believe there's guilt here? If anything, we ought to be rallying together. You grasp at the very fabric of truth while weaving clinging strands of lies, Miss Marple replied with growing intensity. Are we truly believing that Lord Ashcombe was the only one guilty of deceit? Who was in the room during his last breaths? Whose hands were too eager to hide away the secrets of past transgressions? The atmosphere tightened palpably as realization and dread coursed through the room like currents of electric fire. Eyes darted nervously as conversations stagnant in a quagmire of half-truths and fear surrounded them. There, in this pent-up reality, new connections began to unfold like frail petals under the chill of dawn. Pembroke began, yet faltered, face flushed with a color that betrayed his indignation. It's time to broach the subject of your alibi, Lord Pembroke, Miss Marple pressed, her voice dangerously calm. Your earlier absence during the storm might provide more comfort than you've so far let on. Did you not strive to secure what you deemed precious, or were you unearthing something far more dangerous from the past? Preposterous, he roared, fury flickering in his eyes. You think me capable of such cruelty? Oh, but cruelty hides behind such refined masks, she countered, eyes sharp as blades. And I suspect you beyond mere inheritance. You are too closely entwined with Ashcombe's absent malice. Jealousy binds you, does it not? You think that your ghost whispers will not betray you the minute the truth emerges. Stop this nonsense, he rebuked, but a hint of uncertainty seeped through. That's just it. Each layer fashioned so precisely to shelter the rot within. Miss Marple surveyed them, excitement flickering like candlelight in the midst of a storm. I would venture to guess our dear Lord Ashcombe had a secret lurking in life's shadows, and you all circus performers unaware of whose act you were to undertake. The storm raged ever louder outside, but within the walls of Ashcombe, dread pressed against them, like a spirit unsatisfied with its own entombment. The wind howled, carrying the semblance of voices just beyond the door, as if urging the secrets of the past to be laid bare. Just then, like a sudden bolt clawing through the firmament, Miss Marple's gaze fell to a small velveteen pouch that lay askew on a side table. a forgotten remnant of jaded memories that beckoned louder than words. Her heart pounded as she seized it, thrusting open its embroidered mouth to unveil a handful of intimate letters. Each one bore a seal marked with ash and shadow. "You see," she exclaimed, revealing the first letter's elegant script, each word a fragile thread that now flicked sparks to a flame. "Here lies evidence, my friends, viewed through inked insouciance, a web suffocating our cries for clarity. Lord Ashcombe's secrets are bound tighter than your own, and I dare say those very secrets indicate who his true enemies really were." Gasps erupted around her as the tempest swelled beyond the window, and shadows seemed to shift malevolently. This was no calm rescue from their plight. Instead, it uncoupled the flood, urging forth darker revelations just waiting to leak into being. And then, just as abruptly, their cover was compromised. A vaulting creak from above sent tremors through the floor, and a figure flitted across the landing, scarcely more than a spectre in the raging storm. As Miss Marple's attention shifted, transfixed by the sight of a shadow dashed into the night, she could feel the icy fingers of doom creeping closer. "Someone is watching," she screamed, the realization crashing against her senses. "They mean to ensure no secret remains unearthed." The truth hung heavy in the room, just out of her reach, poised on the edge of a precipice that beckoned them into a darkness deeper than they had ever dared to explore. With the storm swirling outside, and the walls of Ashcombe trembling, as if sharing their secrets with the wind, every heart raced at the haunting knowledge. The hunt for the truth was no longer a game, but a relentless pursuit of survival. Chapter 11. The Reluctant Narrator. A desperate scream bounded through the air, shattering the frail tension of the room like the crashing thunder that echoed outside. Miss Marple spun on her heel, heart pounding, only to witness Lady Beatrice's visage twist with horror as she pointed toward the window. The flickering candlelight cast twisted shadows that danced like ghoulish figures against the walls, amplifying the sense of dread clawing at their throats. The storm intensified, a furious crescendo lamenting the dark secrets woven into the very fabric of Ashcombe, as the silhouettes of wind-tossed trees writhed in anguish against the howling gale. "What's happening?" Henstridge barked, his voice wavering as he rushed towards the source of distress. "What is it, Beatrice?" It's a figure. A shadow just darted past the window," she gasped, nearly choking on her words, breathless with fear. Miss Marple forced herself to remain composed, her mind racing like the wild wind outside as she blocked out the pandemonium around her. She had seen it too. The fleeting dark silhouette had slipped past like smoke, and its presence sparked a chilling realization as threads of their unfolding disaster tightened sinisterly around them. Who, no, what, had rushed through their fragile sanctuary? And why did the culminating fear linger like a palpable mist? "Gather yourselves if you would," she declared, her voice cutting through the chaos in a regal command. "The fear you foster must not cloud your judgment. Someone is about to emerge from the shadows." She affixed her gaze upon the roiling storm beyond the window. The truth has a way of revealing itself, often in narrow spaces, much like the tempest we face. But if we're to confront it, we must do so together. Little by little, she saw the others take a breath, as the storm quieted from a tumultuous roar to a low, menacing growl. Just then, just as the facade of civility began to filter back among them, Pembroke, the very embodiment of indignation, stepped forward, eyes alight with a fervor that threatened to spill over into a reckless fury. "This is a farce, a game played at my expense. But Lord Pembroke," Miss Marple interrupted, crossing her hands tightly, "it isn't just your expense we must be concerned with. It is the price of secrets woven into the very air we breathe. Secrets, my dear friend, which you seem most burdened by tonight." His color drained as his gaze darted sideways, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "What do you mean?" "Have you not realized?" she pressed, her perceptive eyes glinting beneath the dim light. "Each of you carries a weight, an unwilling burden that shapes your actions, your thoughts, and even your alibis. Might I suggest we display them openly, speak them aloud, lest they fester? Only in doing so might we unveil the reluctant narrator hidden among us. With all due respect, Miss Marple, you're venturing into territory you cannot truly comprehend," Pembroke shot back, rage bubbling beneath his veneer of composure. "Oh, I believe I understand more than you might imagine." She stepped toward him, each movement calculated as she scrutinized the crease between his brow, which betrayed a tangled web of disquiet. "You have lingered close, have you not? Perhaps hovering in anticipation of something irrevocable, the unearthing of shadows that dance all too near your own self." "Silence!" Henstridge barked, the tension in his voice betraying the cracks in his facade. "You speak of things you do not know, Marple. Stop hiding behind vague insinuations." "Vague? Hardly," she countered with biting clarity. "The echoes of the past resonate through this house, and you are all tethered to them in ways unseen. So tell me, Pembroke, what hideous truth lies hidden behind your indignation? Did you not glean something of note in your excursions outside, or is the way forward too treacherous?" "Enough!" Tyrell cried, her voice razor-sharp as she stepped back into the fray and leveled a heated glare at Pembroke. "You act as though your secrets could shield you, when it is you who killed Ashcombe with your negligence. We all know he was unwell, broken beneath his troubles." Miss Marple observed the dynamic carefully. Shadows shifted, emotions flickered. Broken, yes, but who was complicit in his unraveling? Perhaps he was merely a reflection of the darkness that dwells within you, Lady Terrell. What might Lord Pembroke have uncovered that you wish to keep buried? The room fell silent. Lingering breaths betrayed hearts beneath the promises of control. Lady Terrell flinched as Miss Marple's words sank in, betraying a sentiment that lingered beneath the surface. "I did what was necessary," she retorted weakly, trembling now, vulnerability unwinding like threads pulled too tightly. "Is it a crime to seek liberty from oppression?" "Oppression, or perhaps abandonment?" Miss Marple asked, her gaze piercing the tension. "You wear your liberation like a shroud, yet you suppress the unseen hand that drove you both closer and further apart. Which of you seeks redemption, and which seeks revenge?" Suddenly, their world creaked underfoot, as the energy around them churned dangerously, thick with the tremors of unspoken fears. It was then, amid the fraying nerves and unintended revelations, that one of the curtains shifted, and a flashed silhouette appeared, swirling, deliberate, paused against the midnight backdrop. "Someone such as you," Miss Marple mused aloud, "reveals far more than you realize." The figure loomed, scarcely more than a whisper against the night, and eyes widened in horror as they now recognized the fleeting familiarity. "Who are you?" Lady Beatrice murmured into the heightened silence as the shadow sharpened, revealing itself with a soft, unsettling grin. "Oh, my dear Beatrice," cooed a voice that struck against the sharp specters of the moment. unhinged with glee, yet layered with dread. You've all been looking in the wrong direction. The reluctant narrator is standing right before you, and the truth will never be the same again. In that breathless moment, as the heavens clapped together in thunderous applause and the shadows swallowed the light, an intuitive dread gripped Miss Marple. The final key to the labyrinth unwillingly birthed itself in their midst, a dark spectre all too eager to darken their souls before they were prepared to face the truth. "Who have you brought to us?" she gasped, her heart lurching forward, the power of revelation now taking on a menacing potential. And without warning, the world around them plunged into darkness as the storm echoed in furious glee, swallowing secrets as the reluctant narrator stepped forward, moving with purpose, but haunted by an unspoken truth that could very well consume them all. Chapter 12. The Truth Behind the Teacup. The sound of splintering glass shattered the suffocating silence of Ashcombe, like a crack of lightning striking a lone tree. A scream pierced the air, a high, shrill cry that sent icy fingers of panic crawling up Miss Marple's spine. She darted towards the source, her heart racing as the flickering candles trembled against the oppressive darkness. Through the howling tempest and echoed cries of alarm, she arrived at the window, pulling aside the velvet, drapes that felt as heavy as lead. There, sprawling across the ground, lay the shattered remnants of a beloved teacup, the last serving of Lord Ashcombe's late-night infusion of chamomile, now reduced to shards, each piece glimmering like fractured promises under the pale moonlight. And amidst the shards, a single scrap of parchment fluttered, beckoning like a lost secret, eager to be uncovered. "Careful!" Lady Terrell gasped, her fingers trembling as she too moved closer. That cup was significant. It was given to him by— "Significant indeed," interjected Miss Marple sharply, dropping into a kneel to capture the drifting scrap with deft fingers. "Tell me, dear lady, have you seen something like this before?" She held it aloft, revealing the sparse script etched with haste, the ink smudged under scant light. Each curve of the letters trembled under scrutiny, speaking of urgency that hung thick in the air. "No, Lady Terrell faltered, her brow knitting into a frown, lips pursed as fear danced in her eyes. That could be anyone's, but Miss Marple would not let the evasive tone slip past unnoticed. "Anyone's indeed, but I believe this one letter is another piece in our puzzle concerning our dear Lord Ashcombe." The remnants of his fragile world unfolded before them, like the storm outside, a chaotic bloom of knowledge, desperately yearning to be tamed. "Show us then," Pembroke's voice barked, once rigid with indignation, now dripping with impatience. "Replace our ignorance with your supposed wisdom, Miss Marple." His mockery stung like frostbite, yet his hidden motives were as tissue-thin as the rime that covered the gnarled branches. There was fear in that bravado, and it shimmered just beneath the surface. "Wisdom often carries a burden," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "And here, perhaps, lies the weight of a confession." "Do not play games with us," Henstridge snapped. "We've been through enough terror tonight without more riddles." "Ah, but the riddles are the heart of the matter, Mr. Henstridge," Miss Marple's voice low and rhythmic. "For it is often in the mundane where the most sinister truths reside." She glanced back at the letter, her mind piecing together threads scattered amongst the turmoil they had found themselves in. "There is mention of an object, a relic of Ashcombe's past," one said, "to hold the key to his secretive nature." "Merely fanciful whispers," Terrell retorted, her bravado crumbling like the glass about her feet. Or perhaps the echo of guilt, Miss Marple countered, her eyes catching Pembroke's, piercing through what was left of his composed facade. Did you not notice it too, Pembroke? The designs on that shattered teacup? His surprise shimmered, but he quickly masked it with a bark of laughter. A simple cup, Anne, hardly a clue. Or the catalyst for something far more sinister, one marked with more than just a memory. Perhaps it was not just recollections they sought to bury, but yearnings and grievances folded away under the guise of civility. The shadows twisted, thickening their bonds of dread, and silence filled the air, but for the rain's insistence against the glass, steady and ominous. The letter may lead us deeper, Miss Marple pressed, probing the angles of despair like a needle stitching together the fraying seams of their payback. What we truly seek is the guilt hidden in plain sight, woven in the web of our daily lives. What guilt? Pembroke spat, his composure slipping. It matters not of criminals, she replied, the intensity shifting to Lady Terrell, whose visage palpable alarm washed over her. But those who wear masks, the ones presented by courtesy. You knew of the cup, did you not? You held it more dearly than those other trinkets, a talisman you believed could shield you. What nonsense! Her defense was weak, her voice wavering as panic laced her words. For a brief moment, electricity crackled in the air as each painted word transformed, mindsets burrowing deep into lies stacked high. It was time for clarity to emerge. The past is a powerful solvent, Miss Marple continued, moving toward a nearby table, cluttered with leftover remnants of the evening. But it is completely shrouded in the present's shadows. In that charged air, her sharp eyes fell upon an innocuous silver spoons, each bearing the same insignia as the broken teacup below. A mismatched set, she muttered, confusion creasing her brow. No, far from it. This hints at something altogether darker. Suddenly, a scream clawed its way from the depths of terror as their forms instinctively spun around. Another figure, pale and quaking, stood framed against the dim glow from the hearth. "Ashcombe!" the figure cried, terror-stained on a chalky face, eyes wide with an urgency that tore through the night. But just as quickly, he faltered, collapsing to the floor, leaving a shattered dream of clarity hanging in the air. Before all plunged into darkness, the candle's light extinguished by a shattering wind. In that moment of primal fear, an electrifying realization struck Miss Marple as she stumbled backward. The figures had recast themselves against her heart, their motives unmapping their well-constructed lines. They were not just players. Far worse, they were actors performing in a macabre tragedy that demanded its toll. As silence claimed the room once more and the tempest raged on, Miss Marple's heart raced with dread and determination. The encrypted whispers of truth pulsed against the walls, but she knew one thing. Out of the ashes of shattered trust, she would unravel the final secrets of their storm-wrought tableau. If only she could navigate the murky intentions now unspooling at the edge of her grasp. And then, just as a faint glimmer of dawn crested the chaos, a cry knelled from outside, a ghastly invitation that reverberated through her very soul. The truth behind the teacup demanded to be unveiled. Alas, the shadows urged her forward as she stared into the darkness, her resolve hardening like Caribbean steel. But in this moment of reckoning, they were no longer alone on the precipice. Each soul stirred under the weight of revealed treachery, a chorus urging her onward. The storm outside echoed her thoughts, raging with a promise of calamity yet to unfold, an insatiable reminder that the worst was, in fact, yet to come.